In the summer of 1535, a group of Anabaptists was driven out of Moravia. They abandoned their farms and set out on foot toward the Rhine Valley in Germany, hoping to find others who believed as they did. Some of them never got there. At Passau, on the Danube, at what is today the border between Germany and Austria, about 52 of them were arrested. Several were teenagers. They were locked in the dungeon of the castle above the city, the fortress called the Westeroberhaus, and they stayed there for 5 years, from 1535 to 1540. Some accounts indicate a few were not released until 1544 after 9 years underground. Several died in that prison. Many of those who eventually walked out were executed later anyway. What those people did during those 5 years is the reason this account exists. Before we continue, don't forget to tell us which city you're listening from, and subscribe to the channel to support our community. Thank you, and let's continue. They wrote songs. They composed at least 53 hymns in that dungeon, drawing their words from the Lord's Prayer, the Psalms, and the Sermon on the Mount. Their leader, Michael Schneider, wrote 11 of them. A man named Hans Betz wrote 12, and died in the prison in 1537 without seeing daylight again. They had no way to write music, so they did not try. Each hymn was written to be sung to a tune everyone already knew, popular melodies of the day, some of them secular. Those songs are still being sung, every other Sunday morning, in farmhouses and barns across North America, by roughly 400,000 people. 3 questions run through what follows. How a book of poems written by condemned prisoners in 1535 became the only hymnal of a living church 500 years later. What actually happens inside an Amish house on a Sunday morning, hour by hour, and why one single hymn takes 20 minutes to sing. The songs circulated in manuscript for a generation before anyone put them on a press. The first printing came in 1564, most likely at Cologne. It contained 51 hymns, and it did not carry the name the book is known by today. Its title was a description rather than a title. It announced itself as several beautiful Christian songs, written and sung by the Swiss brethren through God's grace, in the prison at Passau Castle, with a reference to Psalm 139. That reference is not decorative. Psalm 139 is the psalm about God's presence in every place a person can be taken, including the darkest ones. The book spread fast for something illegal. By 1571, at the Frankenthal Colloquy, opponents of the Anabaptists were quoting it against them, which means it was circulating widely enough that the authorities had read it. In 1583, a much enlarged second edition appeared, and it acquired the name it carries now. Ausbund, a German word meaning something like paragon, the finest example of its kind. More hymns were added over the following centuries, and modern editions contain roughly 140. Other Anabaptist figures appear among the authors, including Michael Sattler, executed in 1527, and George Blaurock, the man who received the first adult baptism in Zurich in 1525. One hymn in the collection, number 100, has 14 verses, and every verse was written by a different person. Their initials appear at the head of each one. The book has never gone out of print in more than 460 years. Well over 100,000 copies have been printed in America alone. It is the oldest hymnal in continuous use anywhere in the Christian world, and the Amish are the only church that still uses it as its everyday songbook. The first edition, however, very nearly vanished. In 1928, a historian walked into an antique book dealer's shop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and found a copy of the 1564 printing sitting on the shelf. He recognized it immediately. It is the only known surviving copy in the world, and it is now held in the Mennonite Historical Library at Goshen College in Indiana. The oldest continuously used hymnal in Christendom survived in a single volume that turned up in a second-hand bookstore in Pennsylvania, 364 years after it was printed, roughly an hour's drive from communities that were singing out of its descendants every other Sunday. Now open a modern copy, and the first thing a visitor notices is what is missing. There is no music in the Ausbund, not a staff, not a note, not a single printed melody anywhere in the book. It is a book of words. At the head of each hymn is a line indicating the tune it should be sung to, naming a melody that everyone in 1564 would have recognized on sight. Nobody alive has heard those original melodies performed from notation, because the notation never existed for this purpose. Everything that is sung today comes down through unbroken oral transmission, one generation teaching the next by ear for 4.5 centuries. The tunes are believed to be older than the words, with roots in melodies of the medieval period, some traced to the 12 and 1300s, and across that span they have unquestionably shifted. What Amish congregations sing now is not exactly what the Passau prisoners sang, because no recording, no score, and no correction mechanism ever existed. Which is precisely what makes an Amish Sunday morning worth describing carefully. The service is the transmission system. The first sign that church is coming is a wagon in the driveway. The Amish have no church buildings. Worship is held every other Sunday in the homes of members, rotating through the district, which is a congregation of roughly 20 to 40 households. The furniture for it travels. A large enclosed wagon, called the bench wagon, carries the backless wooden benches, the songbooks, a prayer book, a Bible, and the eating utensils. It is hauled from the last host's farm to the next one, sometimes by a team of horses and sometimes by tractor, and it usually arrives a few days early, often on Saturday. Its arrival is the announcement. When the wagon turns into a lane, the district knows where church is. The host family has been preparing for weeks. The peanut butter spread is made, the cheese is ordered, and the house is cleaned from top to bottom. Most of the furniture on the main floor has to be carried out to make room for the benches, and in some households the place stays torn up for a week afterward. Not every home can hold 150 people. In summer, the service may be held in a farm shed where the implements are kept, or in a barn loft. In winter it might be in the basement. The men set the benches up on Saturday, arranged in 2 sections facing each other, one for the women and one for the men, with an aisle in the middle where the preachers will stand. There is a social function to all this that Amish families acknowledge openly. Hosting church means the entire district walks through your house and looks at it. It is an informal, recurring inspection of whether a household is living within the standards of the community, and it is one reason Amish housewives take particular pains before their turn. It also means that once a year, whether you like it or not, your farm gets a thorough clean-up. Sunday morning starts early because the animals do not observe the Sabbath. Farm families do their chores before dawn so they can leave in time. Those who live close enough walk. Everyone else comes by horse and buggy. And one Amish family member described pacing the horse to arrive on time as an art form, because you cannot simply speed up to make up for lost minutes. Services begin between 8 and 9 in the morning. Arriving families unhitch the horses and tie them, with the host helping. Then the congregation separates before it ever goes inside. The men gather in the barn and the women in the house greeting one another. Older members tend to arrive early, and when the time comes, people file in and take their seats by age, not by family and not by preference. The oldest members go to the front, the youth sit in their own section, separated by gender. Men on one side, women on the other, facing each other across the room. The leadership present will be a bishop, 2 or 3 preachers, and a deacon. All of them are unpaid. None attended seminary. Every one of them was chosen by lot from among the men of the congregation and holds the office for life. They do not wear robes. There is no pulpit, no lectern, and no raised platform. The minister stands on the floor, a few feet from the people, at exactly their level, and here is the detail that surprises nearly every visitor. Neither the ministers nor the members carry Bibles to church. There are no personal Bibles in laps, no bulletins, and no printed order of service, though a small booklet exists that sets out the hymns and scriptures assigned for the year. Between 100 and 150 people are now seated on backless benches, and the room goes quiet. Then someone begins to sing without an instrument, without an announcement, and without anyone standing up to lead from the front. The singer is a vorsinger, a song leader, and he is simply a member of the congregation who knows the tunes. There may be several who take turns. He begins the first syllable of a line alone, and the congregation comes in behind him. The singing goes on for 20 to 30 minutes at the start of the service, and while it is happening, the ordained men get up and leave the room. During the opening hymn, the bishop, the preachers, and the deacon withdraw to a room apart, usually upstairs, and hold a private meeting. Its purpose is to decide that morning which of them will preach. Consider what that means. There is no assigned preacher, no rotation posted in advance, and no prepared manuscript because a man does not know until the singing starts whether he will be speaking for an hour. Amish preachers deliver sermons without notes. They speak from memory of the scriptures and from whatever comes to them, which is understood as being led rather than performing. A man who wrote out a polished address in advance would be displaying exactly the kind of self-assertion the church exists to suppress. The community does maintain a schedule of scripture readings across the year. functioning like a lectionary. Readings from Matthew predominate, with Luke and John filling out the calendar. So the text is known, and it is the same across districts, but the speaker is not. While that meeting happens upstairs, the congregation below is singing its way through the first hymn, which in a slow tune can occupy the entire time the leaders are gone. Then the leaders come back in, and the second hymn begins. The second hymn is always the same hymn. In every Old Order Amish congregation in North America, on every church Sunday, the second song is O Gott Vater, known as Das Loblied, the praise song. It is not chosen, it is fixed. 4 verses. They take about 20 minutes to sing. That arithmetic is difficult to grasp until you hear it. A single syllable is stretched across many notes, rising and falling, so that a line of text that would take 4 seconds to read aloud can take a minute or more to sing. There is no harmony, no instruments, no rhythm in any modern sense, and no attempt at anything an outsider would call performance. Everyone sings the same melodic line, in unison, in High German, very slowly. Visitors consistently describe it as sounding closer to a chant or a lament than to a hymn, and Amish writers themselves have compared it to a funeral dirge without objecting to the comparison. The songs of the Ausbund are songs about persecution, injustice, imprisonment, and death, with redemption underneath. The text of the Loblied is commonly attributed to a Dutch Anabaptist named Lena Ert Klok in the early 1600s, which makes it younger than the Passau hymns around it. Because the service begins at roughly the same hour and the order is fixed, the Loblied is being sung simultaneously, at that same moment, in hundreds of farmhouses and barns spread across 32 states and 3 Canadian provinces, and the tune is not in any book on the premises. It exists only in the memory of the people in the room, learned from their parents, who learned it from theirs, back through the crossing on the ships, back through Alsace and Switzerland, to a stone room under a castle at Passau. At about 8:30, the singing stops, and the first sermon begins. This opening sermon runs roughly 30 minutes. The preacher stands on the floor among the people. Because the congregation may be seated in several different rooms of a farmhouse, he often has to move around so everyone can hear him. He preaches in Pennsylvania Dutch, the everyday spoken language, but the scriptures he quotes are in High German, the formal written language of the church. Most Amish are functionally trilingual: Pennsylvania Dutch at home, High German for worship, English for business with the outside world. Delivery styles vary. Some ministers preach in a distinctive chanting sing-song cadence that rises and falls. Emotion is not restrained, and tears are not unusual. The congregation's behaviour looks strange to a visitor from almost any other church. There is very little interaction. Most people do not make eye contact with the preacher or with each other. Many sit with their faces buried in their hands. Some members nod off, particularly the men who are up at 4 for milking. Children stay with their parents on the benches. There is no nursery and no children's church. Mothers come equipped with a snack, a small toy wrapped in a handkerchief or a picture book, and a small child may get up and walk across the room from the mother's side to the father's without anyone objecting. Noisy children are quietly disciplined. The whole family sits through 3 hours together, which is how an Amish 2-year-old learns what church is. After the first sermon, the congregation does something physical. Everyone turns around, kneels down, facing their own bench, and prays in silence. Then they stand, and the deacon reads the scripture assigned for that day, while the congregation remains standing. 2 prayers are said in the course of the service, and neither is improvised. One is the silent kneeling prayer, the other is read aloud from a printed prayer book, a text that has been in use for generations. The Amish do not compose public prayers on their feet, for the same reason they do not write sermons in advance and do not sing in harmony. There is normally a short break at this point. Some of the men step outside. The woman of the house brings out cookies, crackers, and pretzels for the families with small children. Then everyone comes back in and the main sermon begins, delivered by a different minister. This one runs an hour or more, and in the most conservative affiliations it runs longer. When the main sermon ends, the service does something that has no equivalent in most churches. The preacher asks several of the other ordained men, and sometimes older members, to stand and give a short statement about what was said. These testimonies confirm, add to, or gently correct the sermon in front of everyone. That practice is the whole Amish understanding of authority in one action. The man who just preached for an hour does not own the message. He submits it, publicly and immediately to the judgment of the other men in the room. Nobody in an Amish congregation preaches unchecked. More prayer and singing follow, another half hour or so, and then the service closes with a final hymn. The youth file out first. Around noon, or a little after, the room changes function. If there is church business to handle, a members' meeting is held first, and every visitor and every unbaptized person present is dismissed from the room. Only baptized members remain. That is where discipline, confession, and the practical decisions of the district are handled, out of sight of everyone else. Then the men go to work on the furniture. Some of the benches are lifted onto trestles and become tables. The exact planks that 150 people sat on for 3 hours become the surface they eat from. The meal is deliberately simple, and it is nearly the same everywhere. Bread, peanut butter spread, cheese, cold meat, pickles, red beets, jam, coffee and pie. There is no cooking to speak of because Sunday is a day of rest, and because a meal that requires labour would defeat the purpose. Almost nobody fits in the room at once, so the congregation eats in shifts with the older people and the men first, then the women, then the young. What follows is the part many Amish would say is the real point of the day. People stay for hours, visiting in a community whose members otherwise spend the week on separate farms. Twice a year the pattern breaks. The communion service is an all-day event that includes foot washing, one of the two practices Jakob Ammann insisted on in 1693. 2 weeks before it, the district holds a council meeting at which the Ordnung, the rules of the community, is reviewed point by point, and every single member must express agreement before communion can proceed. That is the mechanism by which a church with no headquarters, no seminary, no salaried clergy, and no printed constitution stays coherent across 400 communities. And the sound at the centre of it, the second hymn, 4 verses, 20 minutes, was written by people in a stone cell who did not expect to survive, and who had no reason to believe anyone would ever sing their words again.